The 21st century belongs to Asia, but how do we make it India's century? To help us navigate this, FCCI and Mckinsey have proposed a pathway to India Inc. and policymakers. The aim is to increase India's per capita income sixfold, achieve 600 million jobs, double female participation in the labour force, cut carbon emissions and provide clean water for all by 2047. Well, those are ambitious, audacious goals. For more on how we get there, we're joined by the outgoing president of FCCI, Sanjiv Mehta, the incoming president, Subhrakant Panda, Anish Shah, vice president of FCCI, and Alok Kshirsagar, the senior partner at McKinsey. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the program. Sanjiv Mehta, as I pointed out at the start of the program, 50 areas that have been identified as potential game changers that could change the landscape, the complexion of the Indian economy. Many of these ideas have been on the table for a while now. A large part of the success will depend on execution, and the execution challenge is often where we have faltered, Sanjiv. To start with, the identification of these areas of priority, 50 in number, that FCCI and Mckinsey have put together, but more importantly, the execution roadmap.
Sure, Shireen. You know, a time comes when the world conspires to make someone wins. And I think that time has come for India. And if we look at from different lenses today, whether it is a fact that 1/5 of the world's working age population will be in India, or whether you look at it from a lens of manufacturing, there is a very clear, all the global firms are looking at building resilience in their supply chain. Yeah, or you look at it from the way India has gone about digitizing its economy. Clearly, the ground is there for India to realize its potential. I don't think there has ever been a time when India is so well positioned to realize its potential and go away from a developing and emerging market and become a middle income country. And so with this perspective, McKinsey and FCCI, we started looking at what do we need to do from the lens of private sector. And so the important bit is this has started with the lens of what the private sector needs to do. And then we asked ourselves that what should be the enabling things which the government would like to add to ensure that the private sector does what it sets out to do. So that's where we started. And you know what we are talking about, if you look at the last 3 decades, India has delivered a growth of 6.5%. And now we have crossed the 3 trillion mark. And if we were to deliver 7.7% growth, which is not something out of realm of what India can deliver, then the objectives of lifting everyone out of poverty is increasing the per capita income by 6x to 1 million. So these are the things which can be delivered. So we picked up 10 areas and which we thought where we could focus on and make a difference. For instance, we picked up manufacturing. What do we need to do? Consumer tech. Then we looked at information and communication technology, financial services, healthcare, infrastructure, and so on. And then we thought that there should also be certain enablers to make this happen. And if I just pick up one enabler to set the conversation going, is one of my favorite subjects is innovation. You know, India as a nation, we need to move up the value chain. And to move up the value chain, we will have to be competitive on cost, service, quality, and very importantly, innovation. Today, when we look at the number of patents filed in India, it is very minuscule when you compare with the US and China. And one of the things which is really lacking in the country, we do not have the ecosystems for innovation. So one of the things that FCCI McKinsey report has looked at, and we believe we should be taking a lead in implementing, is in setting up innovation clusters where public sector R&D, private sector R&D, startups and academia come together. So we have picked up 3 areas to begin with. Yeah, one is renewable energy, the other is EV, and the third is water. And we will
Hmm.
first pick up renewable energy and prove it that this kind of setting up cluster, innovation cluster, can really accelerate the innovation, bringing in new technology, and very importantly, commercializing the technology. And then we
Hmm.
will
Hmm.
move to other areas of innovation. So this is how
Right.
we have looked. Yeah. So that's the kind of differentiator, if I may say so, looking at it first from a lens of what private sector can do rather than looking at what the government can do. And the government we have looked on as an enabler.
You know, and that's where I want to stop you, Sanjiv Mehta, because I'm glad that you said that this report is focused on what the private sector can do. And so before we talk about the medium and the long-term objectives that the report sets out, let's address the short term. Now, there is a common refrain from government that, look, we have done the heavy lifting when it comes to CapEx. We have front-loaded CapEx in the hope that it will ensure that private CapEx also picks up. That has yet to happen. In fact, the chief economic advisor going as far as to say that if the government continues to spend as much as it is spending on CapEx, it will lead to higher rates. Now, Sanjiv Mehta, I want to understand from you, what is holding back private investment at this point in time? As you point out in your own words, the stars have never been aligned for India in the manner that they are today. You believe that India is best positioned today. Why then is the private sector hesitant to put fresh money on the table?
First, Shireen, I think it would be wrong to say that the private sector is hesitant. The risk appetite of private sector hasn't gone away. And I think everyone in private sector is clamoring to get growth. And when growth comes, all the other indices fall into place. Let me give you one example, which we often ignore. There was a lot of trapped capacity in the economy linked to NPAs. And then when through NCLT, you get released this trapped capacity, you're talking about close to 8 lakh crores. That's the kind of trapped capacity which was there. Now, this should be taken into account when you look at the net addition of capacity. And this will change the scenario significantly. Yeah. And so I believe that if you look at during the COVID period, yeah, the capacity utilization was between the 60s and the 70s. Yeah. If India keeps growing at 6-7%, then I see no reason why the capacity utilization won't go up and people will start investing. A company like Hindustan Unilever has not shied away from investing because we don't look at it from a short-term basis. We always look at it from a medium to long-term basis. And so have many other
Yeah.
companies. But in the intervening period, I think the government did a great job. Yeah, of leading
Yes, the
investments
government.
through the capital expenditure
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
government.
yeah. Absolutely, and it continues to do so. And now with capacity utilization rates between 70 to 80% across different sectors, the expectation is that we will start to see a pickup in private investment as well. But Subhrakant, let me address what we heard there from Sanjiv Mehta. He said, in terms of actionables, there is now an attempt to try and create innovation ecosystems, and the focus areas are going to be renewable energy, electric mobility, and water to start with. In terms of financing, Subhrakant, not just for these three specific areas that the FCCI Mckinsey report have outlined as the start of creating these innovation clusters, but the larger spends on R&D, because that again has been an area where government has constantly asked the private sector, don't look at us, look within to say what is holding back R&D spends. Is there likely to be a shift? Are you seeing that change within your membership as well on spends on R&D going up?
So that's a great question, Shireen, because, like Sanjeev said, and I would like to reiterate, I think, innovation is something that has to be emphasized if India is to actually leapfrog and achieve its full potential, because the days of Jugaad is behind us. We have to look at being, competitive globally, and to do so, we have to take the lead when it comes to innovation and R&D. And I have often made the point that, when you look at Make in India, I think the government has done a great job in terms of creating an enabling environment through ease of doing business measures and PLI schemes, etc., to attract global supply chains to India and give a boost to manufacturing. But eventually, I don't think we should look at only making in India. I think we have to look at innovating in India and designing in India if we are to truly move up the value chain. And in that context, when we, just to expand the question a little bit, when we look at the manufacturing sector, for example, in the FCCI Mckinsey report, and we say that there is given the shift in global supply chains, India has a potential to capture between 800 billion to 1.2 trillion of trade flows by 2030. That is going to happen only if Indian companies take the lead in terms of wholeheartedly adopting digitization and software-enabled manufacturing and looking at partnership with academia and tech companies. So yes, I believe that the shift towards greater R&D spend is happening, and this is something that has to come, sort of almost as a self-calling, instead of looking at R&D merely as something to be done if we have tax advantages, tax breaks, for example. Now, I'm not arguing against tax breaks. I think that's important to have to encourage R&D spend, but companies have to realize, and I believe are realizing, that we have to look at R&D spends and innovation in order to achieve India's full potential, be it in manufacturing, be it in any other sector.
Well, let me get Anish Shah to comment on that. And since, the focus of this report also is on enhancing India's manufacturing competitiveness and ensuring that India does benefit from the reshaping that we are seeing as far as global trade is concerned. Anish Shah, India will become the magnet of manufacturing. This has been the aspiration for over a decade now. And yet we have seen that the share of manufacturing to GDP has not really changed significantly over this period. In this context of building resilient supply chains, people are looking at alternatives, and India has emerged as one of the possible areas where not just tier 1 manufacturing, but perhaps tier 2, tier 3 manufacturing as an alternative or a backup to China is also being considered at this point in time. Where do you believe more work needs to be done to ensure that this time around the aspiration is in fact a reality?
Shireen, a lot of work has been done on this already. And this is an area where I would give a lot of credit to the government for the policies they've put in place, for the logistics infrastructure that is being set up. And we're really looking at automotive to be a key sector where Make in India becomes huge. In India, we've got domestic car manufacturers winning against everyone else. Why can't we do that around the world? And many of the policies coming in place now, as we think about not just where we've been for ICE cars, but even for EVs, will facilitate that. You talked earlier about investments being made. And from the private sector, we are seeing a lot more investments coming in. At the Mahindra Group in particular, we are doubling our auto capacity. And in addition to that, we just announced 10,000 crores of investment for electric vehicles. And that is really around first Make in India for India. And then beyond that, we'll start looking at Make in India for the world.
How important is it going to be for Indian companies at this point in time to bring in global partners or to bring in global capital to be able to fuel the kind of growth that you expect? Is this also a time where we will see more Indian companies scouting for global opportunities, both from an innovation perspective and a technology perspective, not so much from a market perspective?
Both are important, Shireen. And I do want to specify that while we look at global partners, it's not only about taking their technology now, because as I go back to your point on R&D, and we've got Mahindra Research Valley and Chennai, that really has been the hub for us to deliver the cars that we've delivered so far, which are at a very high quality. So R&D in India is at a much higher level today. That said, as we look at the global market, partnerships do help us take it forward. And similarly for capital, we see a lot of sources within India for capital. There will be global capital that comes in. Often that will help us, again, win in global markets. So both points are essential, but I would look at it as not a necessary condition. It's something that will just help us do better.
What's the export target over the next 5 years, Anish Shah, before I bring Alok into the conversation?
That's a difficult question for us because we have such huge demand in India that we are trying to fix right now or trying to meet at this point in time. And our export markets are clamoring for more. So at this stage, our first focus is double capacity, bring our wait times for our vehicles in India to a much lower level, and then look at a set of markets globally where we can take a significant market share. And then beyond that, a space to go into another set of markets. So we've got a fairly aggressive plan for global growth. Don't have numbers right now because we're more looking at serving our capacity in India before we go more aggressive globally.
Okay. Alok, as I pointed out, what matters most at this point in time is the execution roadmap as well as the financing roadmap. These are large, audacious goals that FCCI and Mckinsey have put together in terms of the action agenda to 2047. Now, just give me a sense of the kind of capital, both domestic and foreign, that will be required to be able to get us to these goals that have been identified in this report. And more importantly, where do you see the key vulnerabilities? What are the downside risks to some of these projections?
No, thank you, Shireen. I think firstly on execution, this has been done with 200 companies involved. And so this is not an academic perspective. This is actually what companies want to do and want to drive on the ground. A lot of this is also focused on leveraging India's digital infrastructure. So if I look at, and I'll come to the financing question in a minute, but the reality of the opportunities of the India stack, particularly as you now have logistics, digital health, and ONDC, is now going to create huge new opportunities for companies to execute further and faster than ever before. So I think the first and foremost is at every stage, you'll see this in our action plan, is focused very much on what is it that the private sector can do and what can be done in the different states and centers together. The second point on financing, I think there are two sources we need to reflect on. One is, of course, equity capital, both domestically, as you have more and more companies growing, and we expect to see another 1,000 companies grow to be beyond $500 million in revenue over the next 7 years. And that's going to be a huge capital markets and IPO opportunity that is a way to raise domestic capital. And the second is we expect to see a significant foreign equity capital coming into India. You've already seen this, of course, in the last 2 years with respect to both FDI and FII. And actually, if you look at the manufacturing supply chains that we just talked about, also agri and food processing, electronics, and several other sectors, we actually see a significant appetite from McKinsey's own clients in the investor space and the sovereign wealth space, focusing on India. On financing, the biggest issue is actually credit, particularly for MSMEs. And again, this is talked about a long time, but now we're seeing change happen. And why is that execution happening? Because you're finally moving to more cash flow based lending for MSMEs, because you now have the data that's coming off your transport portals, your logistics portal, your actual GST information that you can now underwrite. For example, on companies participating in the government digital marketplaces or on the ONDC. So if I look at the single biggest source of capital to drive growth will be to shift the credit penetration to MSMEs, which is still around only 40%, to about 80% over the next 7 or 8 years. We are already seeing the leading private sector institutions jump ahead with respect to loans to transporters, to logistics companies, to warehouses, farmers in export value chains, for example, in shrimp, fruit and vegetables. So the biggest single shift will be in the credit availability to MSMEs using the data for cash flow lending. And that will have a multiplier impact on larger companies and the ability to attract equity financing.
Well, that's an important point. And as you rightly mentioned, the gap there persists when we talk about access to credit for MSMEs, and that needs to be something that continues to be worked on. But Sanjiv Mehta, you started the program by giving me a very specific indication of the priority areas that you hope to focus on by way of the innovation clusters, not just from an industry point of view, but also from an HUL point of view, Sanjiv, on the back of the 10 priority areas identified and the 50 actions that have been put down as well. What specifically can we expect? And an area of interest for me and a passion for me specifically is unlocking the potential of the women in this country and enhancing the role that women play in India's economy. So specifically from that lens as well, what more can we expect?
Superb. Let me start by telling you, Shireen, that last week we have about 750 scientists and technologists in R&D centers, 3 R&D centers in India. And last week we touched gender parity in R&D. Now, gender parity in R&D, when the national quotient is about 16%, is something which we are very proud about. Yeah, and one of the things which we need to do is encourage women's participation in STEM. And this gives me huge hope and optimism. So this is on one side. If I look at it at HUL in general, yeah, we are about 44, 45% gender quotient. And in another 2 years, we'll become gender balanced. Yeah. Then when you look at it from a lens of what we've been doing on Shakti, we have now got about 200,000 Shakti Ammas who generate a turnover of nearly $500 million. Yeah, again, even in deep remote areas, people want to work, people want to earn their livelihood and lead a life of dignity. So today we are reaching a stage where the women of India are craving for opportunities, and there are several examples today of where we are seeing this being made, the opportunities being made for them. Now, this will need to be accelerated. Yeah, today, women's participation in labor is about 20%. We are looking at least doubling it. And that would be also bringing in equity. But that would make a tremendous difference to the GDP of the country. So clearly, as far as women's participation is concerned, I'm a big believer in it. And I believe that as a nation, we need to make definitely big strides in making a difference.
Alok, I'm going to give you the final say as we wrap this up. Can we expect an periodic outcome report? Alok, that would be interesting, right? To see how much progress has been made, where the gaps are.
So Shireen, let me make a commitment to you, which is this is not a report. This is an initiative that we will continue for multiple years with FCCI. We will have a report out every year, and that's why Subhrakant, as the next president, and Anish as the successor to him, have all been part of this team together. And from a McKinsey perspective, we look at this as a roadmap for execution. We're committed to creating jobs and growth. That's why we call it sustainable and inclusive growth. And frankly, I'm very excited about it because not only the 200 companies, there are thousands of people who've been involved, both academic institutions, investors globally. And so we're very excited about this opportunity for India. So we're very focused on 600 million jobs, 6 times the per capita income, activating the sectors, partnering with the states, and creating thousands of successful companies in the scale-up India mindset. So we're absolutely committed to outcomes here, Shireen, and we're excited about the partnership with FCCI over multiple years to make that happen.
All right, Alok, Sanjiv Mehta, Subhrakant Panda, Anish, appreciate you joining us here to take us through the execution roadmap that's been charted out by FCCI and McKinsey to ensure that India achieves its audacious goals, some outlined here, including a 6-fold increase in per capita. But we look forward to continuing to review the work that's being done and how the private sector is going to take the lead on ensuring that these goals are realized. Always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us. That's it then on this edition of CEO Sentimeter. From all of us here on the team, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.